Good morning, everyone. Dr. Bostic, Dr. Casada, and of course, Deputy Mayor Kavanaugh and Commissioner Muller. Thank you to those who are tuning in for our Facebook Live Town Hall meeting. Let me apologize first and foremost that there is a Petrillo truck out my window, and I guess they're repairing the street. And it's not a city one; it's a Con Ed one. So I apologize for the noise up front. Today, we just across the board, I think it's important to note that COVID cases are down in the city's workforce across in the city. Our hospitals, our death rate, and of course those who are just who are contracting COVID-19, all those rates, for the most part, all those rates are all down. It's an exciting time for all of us, at least on this front. When the governor announced his plan that we would go into phase 2, we worked with Jim Kavanaugh to put in place relaxing some of the city's rules so that restaurants could be open, because restaurants will not be open unless they're providing services outdoors. So there are many restaurants that couldn't take advantage of that because they didn't have sidewalk space, they didn't have they had parking lots, but they didn't have parking available to them. And we've been able to relax a lot of those rules. And I think, what do we have, 30?
Oh, we're over 40 now, Mayor. The applications are rolling in like wildfire. It's going pretty well.
That's great. That's an excellent job, man. So we're going to take advantage of that today. We're going to run down to Central Avenue and McLean Avenue, rather, and to take advantage of some of the restaurants that are open down there. We'll be doing that with Councilman Ruba. The weather is warm. The restaurants are, like I said, are open to outdoor dining. Our beaches, or the beaches, I should say, are open. Not that we have any beaches to think of, but for those like my daughter decided to walk out the door a little while ago, she's off to the beach, we just have to be mindful of the fact that we've come a long way, but there's still ways to go. The pandemic is still here, still alive and well. We now have the additional issues that are surrounding the current events with protesting that's happening across the country because of the murder of George Floyd. And so that we'll still have that. And we might see it, when we're being told we might see a spike up as a result of the protests that are going on. But hopefully it won't be much of a spike. We can move past move past this COVID-19 as quickly as we can. Let me just take a look at my notes here, see what we have. Like I said, we'll talk about this. The social climate is something that we're all obviously worried about here in our country. But we'll tell you that because of the hard work of our clergy, thank you. The hard work of our police officers, and thank you, Commissioner. We've had about 3 protests so far, and the protests we have all been peaceful. There has been no spike in crime, and there are no protest-related crimes happening in the city, though there have been some news reports connecting the two, but we all know, and the police commissioner will talk about that later, that it's not connected to the protest. And so the people of our city, this is a wonderfully diverse city, Yonkers. Like I said, over 100 different people call, different nationalities call Yonkers home. There's over 60 different languages spoken here. People wanted to be able to have their voices heard, and we did so. And they did so working hand in glove with the police department. We have while we're not perfect, the Justice Department was here, and we were able to implement over 100 different reforms to our department that I think provided a lot of collateral in the bank when it came time to dealing with our public. And so there's a general overall trust of our department, and that's a good thing. And there's we have, like I said, it's a hand in glove approach. It's community policing at its best. And, we will continue to monitor the situation and hopefully we'll continue to see the same. Let me just say that there are a number of questions. What I'm going to do is, rather than get into those questions just yet, I'm going to ask our superintendent of schools to open up, because I know that there's some discussions about summer school and all that. You might want to update everybody, and that might push forward some questions. So Dr. Casada.
Good afternoon, Mr. Mayor, Deputy Mayor, Commissioner Mueller, Dr. Bostic. Thank you, Mr. Mayor, for giving me an opportunity to interact with you and the community. Yes, absolutely. A lot of executive orders have been signed in the last couple of days. All of those executive orders have a direct impact on the services that we provide here in the Yonkers Public Schools. So allow me to address the first executive order, which is the possibility of having in-person graduations for our students. Let me be clear as it relates to this particular executive order. We will not do anything that will impact our students, our families, and the community in a negative way. So we will only have in-person graduation. Number one, if our students want to have in-person graduation, we will be canvassing our students and finding out what they would prefer. So there will be a survey that will be sent to our students today to see if they are interested in an in-person graduation. It is important to note that if we are to have an in-person graduation, it will only be for students only. There could be no spectators, because we have way too many students that will be graduating. And right now, my initial plan indicate that we would need to have 14 different graduations after the 26th in order for us to make sure that all students have an opportunity to participate. So if we do have a in-person graduation, they will be for students only, and they would be live streamed for the families and the parents to be able to see it. But again, we are planning and we are surveying our students to see what they want to see, because I think that they need to be the decision makers as it relates to what we do next, not us, the adults. For our 8th graders, the moving up ceremonies, those ceremonies will be virtual ceremonies. We will not change our plans as it relates to those students. I think that all of our schools have designed excellent virtual graduation and excellent ways of allowing our students to come to the schools to celebrate their success. So we're going to continue with those plans. The other executive order, Mr. Mayor and the community, speaks to what is called the extended school year for special needs students. And once again, the governor has signed an executive order indicating that we may have in-person services for special needs students. And there's a great deal of planning that is involved in order for us to be able to do that. So right now we are in the middle of planning to see if it is feasible for us to provide an in-person special education students. There are a lot of unanswered questions. The first one is, do the parents want to send our students to the in-person summer program? So we already sent a letter to our parents, and they will be responding to us no later than June 12th to let us know if they are interested in us having an in-person program. The other issue that affects us is whether or not we will have the necessary staffing to be able to run the program. As you know, this is a voluntary program for our professionals, so they would choose whether they want to work or not. So that's important to know. And then the other piece that is important is whether or not we have transportation companies that are willing to do this. So unless we have those three pieces in place, it would be very, very difficult for us to offer in-person special education to our students, but we are still in the middle of planning. I'm asking the parents who received the letter from Dr. Rodriguez to please respond to the letter as quickly as possible, because that will allow us to have the necessary information for us to make the best decision as it relates to these programs. As it relates to grab and go breakfast and lunch, we will continue those services through the summer. We will not stop providing breakfast and lunch to our students. As you know, food insecurity is real for our families, so we want to make sure that we are assisting them. So we will continue that. And in terms of childcare, I will continue to speak to the deputy mayor to see whether or not we are able to continue that. However, we do know that the county will continue to provide childcare to first responders and to other families who need it in our community. And then finally, camps. I know that there are organizations that are applying for licenses to apply for camps. So we are hoping to be ready to have camps in our schools beginning June 29th. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Good. Thank you, Dr. Casada. And as always, you're right there sitting in your office, manning the operations and doing what we can. And this has been a tough year this year for our kids, for you, for the teachers, for the entire staff. But you've been able to navigate this very, very well. Hopefully, we'll see some relief. We'll be able to get our people back to work soon and get them back in the classroom and get our kids back to school. If you don't mind, Commissioner, I'm going to switch to Dr. Bostic and see if Dr. Bostic wants to maybe just to talk to us a little bit. I mean, I know there's lots for us to talk about, Dr. Bostic. Certainly, current affairs have us talking about George Floyd, what's happening with police departments and the reforms that we're starting to see come out of that tragic event. So just wanted to see if you have any thoughts.
Well, thank you, Mr. Mayor, and to the panel of leaders that have joined us this morning. In my lifetime, we've never seen a movement quite like what we're seeing happening now. I think that the death of George Floyd just lit a match on a situation that has already been brewing for years and years and years in this nation. I think the graphic nature by which we witnessed his death just sent chills through everybody, no matter what your views are about this issue. It was the kind of scene that you kind of would go to a movie and see in one of those horror movies, but to actually see it happen to a real human being in live time, it just took the heart out of America and even other parts of the world. And I think it underscored a problem that has been existing in our nation for so long. I think the advent of social media has brought a spotlight to it, in that these things are now being filmed all over the country, but they've always been happening. They just have not been, under the scrutiny of social media and, everybody with a cell phone. So I think that it's a good thing in one way that this has been brought to a head. It does not, in my mind, is not a stigma on police departments. In America, it's a stigma on segments of our society. It's not a police department problem. It's a systemic problem. It runs across government. It runs across education. It runs across the business community. And if the truth be told, as a pastor, I have to admit that the most segregated part of our society is Sunday morning at worship time. I think what this has done is it's awakened a sleeping giant in America, particularly, as well as in other parts of the world. And we're seeing the younger generation saying that this is not the America that we want to live in going forward. We want to live in a nation where everybody is truly equal. We want to live in a diverse nation where everybody's ideas and input can be valued the same. And if a person goes to school and does what they need to do and earns the right to hold down certain positions, they won't be blocked because of the color of their skin. And they want to live in a nation when they get stopped on a highway or late at nighttime, the same law that applies to one of us is going to apply to all of us. And so I am encouraged to see young people. I've been to like probably 8 or 10 rallies now myself, peaceful protests. And it is just amazing to see the diversity of people who have come together that says that this is not the nation that we want to live in, and are willing to step up and say something about it and do something about it. So I applaud our leadership here in the city of Yonkers and the manner in which you have handled this situation. And I applaud those who have spearheaded these protests in a very peaceful way. And that's the way it should be. And so we're very encouraged about the outcome. We're seeing changes being implemented all over the country. I've not witnessed so many changes taking place within government and within law enforcement departments in such a short span of time as has happened under these set of circumstances. So again, I think that because of our leadership here in the city of Yonkers, not to say it's a perfect city, but I think under your leadership, Mayor Spano, your willingness to take on programs like My Brother's Keeper, to say that there is disparities that have been taking place with boys and young men of color, and we want to do something about it here in the city of Yonkers and take the lead not only in Yonkers, but in the state and one of the top leaders in the nation. I think you ought to be commended for doing that, Dr. Quesada, and his partnership, our law enforcement agency stepping up and being mentors to our young boys and young men of color, I think shows that, again, the city's not perfect, but it's headed in the right direction. And I think if we continue to move forward like we are, I think this city can be a model for other cities around the nation. Thank you.
Thanks, Dr. Bostic. So much appreciate that. And yeah, you know, it was just a couple of years ago when we accepted President Barack Obama's challenge to put forth My Brother's Keeper, because we are taking that holistic approach to you know, young men, young black men, young black boys, and taking a look at their education, because we know that the single way to get out of poverty is only through a good education. You need to break that cycle. Listen, you know, we all know that one of the other ways we lose far too many young men of color is through homicides. You know, just saw in the news today, it was a record murder rate that's in Chicago yesterday. 60 people, I think, are murdered. Some crazy number. So we have our work to do in uplifting and changing the entire process across the board, the educational process, the economic process, obviously how we teach our young people. And My Brother's Keeper recognizes all of that. And that's why it's been so successful. And because of the leadership of Dr. Bostic and Dr. Quesada, we were recognized by Barack Obama by name, very specifically, and given an award, given additional amount of money. So because of the efforts and the hard work that they have done. So I just want to say thank you. I know that the commissioner is here, Commissioner Muller, so you might want to let us know how things are going in Yonkers.
Thank you, Mayor. So to just build off what the rest of the panel was saying, under the leadership of Mayor Spano, we've had a very good experience with the protests thus far. Again, I think credit goes all around. So many other places in the country, it's hard for the police and the community to collaborate and work together here because we've already been doing it. Not to say there's a ton of work to be done, but clearly there was an understanding with community leaders. There was an understanding with the outreach we've already done that we were able to get together and collaborate. A peaceful protest does not go peacefully unless you have all of the stakeholders involved working together with that, with the peaceful protest in mind. That means the clergy, who are absolutely invaluable and indispensable, not just in this time of crisis, but every day. The protesters who's willing to say, look, we don't want to do damage and bring chaos. We want to have our voices heard, and the police, who are able to manage these situations where things are being said that the individual police officer may say, it doesn't apply to me, but it's important for us to understand the context of the frustration. So, again, it's a true collaboration effort, truly collaborative effort. And it's something that we have been working on. It's something we will continue to build on. As the mayor said, with respect to, the looting, we have not had any looting incidents per se that have been kind of a one-off of the protests. We've seen it in other places, but not here. We've been on top of our game, paying attention to see where people are going. We kind of understand the methodology that some criminals are using to exploit this very painful time in the country for personal gain by doing burglaries and robberies and things like that. So, we're going to continue to work. There's a lot of exciting things going on. Obviously, this has brought this conversation to the forefront. We're moving very quickly to have implicit bias under the guidance of the mayor and the support of the mayor, guidance for implicit bias training for all of our officers. And we think that's a great start. We're starting to see other really great innovative programs like peer intervention. If we can walk back to the George Floyd murder, I think one of the biggest things that jumped out at me, and I think most of the country, is why didn't the other officers intervene and say, hey, what are you doing here? So there are some real great programs. For example, the New Orleans PD, who had a lot of problems, just a short time ago, have really become cutting edge and innovative in terms of community outreach. So the peer intervention model is something we're looking at too, where we can train each other's officers, our own officers, and each officer, so that none of us get to the point where we got to with Mr. Floyd. So there's a lot of innovative things going on, a lot of conversations. Obviously, the mayor is huge on actionable items, not just talk, as am I. So we're going to continue to work towards these goals. And I truly believe that we're going to be in a better place for them.
I'm unmuted, right? Okay. There were a couple of the people checking in on us today. Wanted to talk about some of the police reforms that potentially are going to come down for Yonkers. And I want to just point something out, because I think this is important. Several years ago, the Justice Department came into Yonkers, and they came into Yonkers on complaints that the department was aggressive. It had some systemic racism in the department, and frankly, that was what I inherited when I became mayor in 2011. We started dealing with the Justice Department and dealing with them, and what came out of that that 5-year investigation were a list of over 100 different reforms that were suggested and adopted by the Yonkers Police Department. We already banned chokeholds. We already have changed the process for which our canine units take down a perpetrator. Right? They bite the hold, versus they just, I don't know what they were doing before. It seemed kind of harsh, but so they're is a number of reforms that have already happened across the board. And as a result of these reforms, we've seen an 80% reduction in complaints against our officers. Like I said, and you look at, shootings, there are, knock on wood, superstition, but, we haven't had really a shooting in the direction of non-police personnel in a very long time. So it's a department that is proactive, not reactive. It's a department that understands its community. It's a department that, yes, there needs to be change. We know that. We all agree that we could always be better. There's nothing perfect in this world, that we can be better. But I also think we can agree that that this department has gone a long way and has made some great changes. And we saw that in the protests that took place. The protests, what I saw were peace-loving people, wanted to be heard. Yeah, there were some agitators there. I think you see that everywhere. But they weren't going to be persuaded. They wanted their voices heard. And they were walking and they were talking with police officers. And police officers at some point actually walked with them and were providing water for many of the people that were participating in the marches. And we were kind of a model for a national attention as to what is the right way to do it. And I'm proud of our police department. I'm proud of our Yonkers residents. I'm proud of our faith-based organizations that all worked hand in glove in an effort to make sure that we all agreed and we all knew that George Floyd should have never died that day. Never should have died that day. And we wanted to make sure that we have a community that was hurting and it was angry, was frustrated, and they wanted to be heard. And we wanted to make sure that each and every individual was heard. And yeah, they were angry, they were frustrated. So am I. But and they have every reason and every right to be angry and frustrated by what happened that day. So I'm glad to see that they all happened very, very well. One of the questions are how many Black police officers we have in the city of Yonkers. We have struggled with that for a long time to have a department that looks more like the community that is sworn to protect and serve. But in this last class, we had a record number of young men of color, among young people who were participating in that process and taking the tests so that we can hire more African Americans in our department. But do you have anything, John, to offer to that? Because I think we have come a long way. We have hired more Black officers, but I think that we still have a ways to go, frankly. And the only way we're going to be able to really make that work is by getting into the community, doing with community services, getting into our schools, and getting young people excited, especially young African Americans, excited about being a police officer.
So my take on it is, and I've said this for a long time, even before I was police commissioner, you can't have a conversation with a young Black male at a library from a Black cop 5 minutes before they take their need to fill out the application. The relationship is so fractured that it's just an overarching, it's just symptomatic of the larger problem between communities of color and police. We do extremely well in recruitment with Hispanic males and females. We do well with women, and we do well with Black females. We have not bridged the gap with the African American male. That is a priority of mine for the next test. I think, again, like the common theme is putting it plainly. You can't have a conversation 5 minutes before you take the test and convince somebody who's had experiences, perspectives, perceptions, and expect that they're going to take the test and want to be a part of our organization. Now, having said that, it's kind of like the beauty of what I love about the Yonkers Force. And if the public doesn't know, the Yonkers Force is one of two football teams that the mayor was the brainchild of the mayor. So the mayor took two football teams and in an effort, this is some time ago, to put together one for the fire department called the Yonkers Brave, one for the Yonkers Force, sponsored by the Yonkers Police. Detective Keith Olson has done an amazing job of really, taking this Yonkers Force under his wing and working with them. We eat dinner with them before the games. We spend time together. We talk through things. But the point is that that's the kind of interaction where you have someone playing varsity football for 2 years or 3 years that we will be able to build a relationship other than that 5-minute conversation. And my hope is, and the ultimate dream is, and I think Dr. Bostic can speak to this, playing basketball, that the vast majority, like I think less than 1% of anybody makes it to the NFL. Far better goal to take police officers from young men in our community and make it part of us. But I think that relationship and those dinners and those conversations all help us getting closer. So my dream, ultimately, the success is going to be when one of our first Yonkers Force young football players actually gets sworn in as a Yonkers police officer.
I appreciate the accolades, but Dr. Posada was very much the driving force within the Board of Education of getting those football teams off the ground. And I appreciate the accolades, but like I said, he really did a great job. And I just want to say thank you, because I think that that working with everything else that we've been doing, they sound like silly things, right? Coffee with a cop and stop and shake, and the police Explorer program, where young kids from our school district can go work side by side with a police officer, getting our police officers into our schools so that there's a communication going on with our police officers and the kids that they've been sworn to serve and protect, and they do that because it gives them, there's, I guess Dr. King talked about that all the time, where, about knowing somebody to understand them. And, that's how you foster that relationship. And that's how you can move people forward. So they have done a great job with that. You guys have done a great job with that all across the board. But if I can just go back to Dr. Bostic, though, because I want to just ask Dr. Bostic, what else do you think or we can do to get more, more of our young Black men, Black boys to consider law enforcement as a career path?
Well, I think the more the police officers are engaged in the everyday life of African American males, I think those walls will be, a lot of the fact that you don't see a lot of African Americans applying for the test is because there's a universal mistrust between African American males and police officers. And unfortunately, when you see what recently happened, it just exasperates that in the mindset of African American males. And so those images have to be broken down relationally. And I think the more that police officers are engaged in the everyday life of these young boys of color, I know that the Guardian Association does a great job of being mentors to the boys in the MBK program. That's a great first start, but those are all African American males. I think they need to see white male officers that are engaged. I remember there were two, and God forgive me because I'm getting older, I don't recall their name, but they were assigned, I think they worked for you, Captain Muller, when you were Captain Muller at the time, that were assigned to this district, this sector. And they knew every kid in our neighborhood. And they often came down when we had our midnight basketball games, and they got involved. They just hung out with the guys, and you could visually see a level of respect and trust being developed between those officers and the young men that were in our neighborhood and within our community. And that made a difference, because it was those same officers, if they saw one of those young men on the street doing something they should not have been doing, their whole approach to them was completely different. You know, as opposed to being very aggressive in the way that they approach those young men as law enforcement officers. They could call them by their first name, and you know, they knew them, and that kind of, you know, made relationships a lot better. So I think when those kinds of things can continue to happen in our community, not just the guardians because they are minority police officers, but also white officers can be like, you know, those officers that were assigned to our sector here across the city, and where there are large pockets of African-American males. I think that'll begin the process of making young men have a greater level of trust for police officers, and then see their profession as something that they wanted to aspire to become. You know, I very quickly, when I was growing up in the city of Yonkers, I lived over on Waverly Street. And that's when the officers used to walk the beat more during that era. I mean, we knew every police officer, and they knew us. And, you know, we would go up behind what's Enrique Fermi now, there's a little basketball court there. We would go up, and they would come up after work, and they would play with us. And we had incredible level of respect for police officers during that time. I don't remember a young man that didn't have a lot of respect for officers, but because all those officers got involved in our everyday life. I remember they would, if I was on the way to a basketball game and they were off duty and they just saw me walking, they would stop me and ask me where I was going. And if I told them I was going to the game, they said, "Get in the car, I'm going to take you." They would take me, they would stay at the game with me, and then they would bring me back home. I mean, those are the kind of things I still remember at my age now that had a very positive and left a very positive impact on me. And so I just think, you know, if officers became more personal, you know, and not so official with these young men, and got involved more in their everyday life, you know, whether it's on the court, whether it's on the football field, you know, whatever it might be, I think you'll begin to see a greater level of trust develop. And that's when you'll see more guys feel comfortable about, because right now, a lot of young blacks feel like they're being a sellout, being a part of the police department because of the abuse that we see happening by those unfortunate persons that abuse the law, you know, in executing their responsibilities.
Yeah, and I mean, and it was this last class, Dr. Bostic, that we had a record number of participation amongst the you know, children of our minority children in our city. And so it was to see, obviously this George Floyd thing is going to set us back somewhat, but we also know though that we've done a lot of good things. We got to work hard. We got to continue to change the narrative. Dr. Quesada, I got one person here that was asking about female girls of color, MBK.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And before I respond to that question, I want to underscore the commissioner's message about implicit and explicit bias. And I just want to say that that type of training is not only for police officers. I think everyone that is working with our young people should participate in implicit bias training. And Commissioner, I can recommend some names of individuals that are doing phenomenal work across the nation that can do this training. I think all of our educators should participate in implicit bias training. I think all of our healthcare professionals should participate in implicit bias professional training, rather, because the idea for us to stop what's happening is to begin respecting me for who I am. And that training is not just for white people, that training is for all of us, because all of us carry implicit bias. So we need to put an end to that so that we can put an end to racism in our country. And that is so important. And we do it well. We've been doing implicit bias training in the Yonkers Public Schools, but we need to find resources to be able to do more of that training. And then we need to bring educators and community leaders to be able to do this. In terms of My Sister's Keeper, Mr. Mayor, we have My Sister's Keepers movement in a number of our schools. We are going to expand next year My Sister's Keepers so that our young ladies and our young women are part of this movement. This week, we are starting a relationship with Darnay Holmes. Darnay Holmes, who is a brand new football player for the New York Giants. So he comes from California. His girlfriend, his fiancée, just graduated from college, and she wants to be part of the work. So Mr. Holmes will be coming to us in Yonkers. He will be working with us. We have had already two Zoom call with him, and himself and his girlfriends are both interested in being part of My Sister's Keeper and My Brother's Keeper. So more information to come for our young women so that they are fully part of the movement that My Brother's Keeper has begun here in the city of Yonkers.
Thank you, Dr. Quesada. I'm going to go back to Commissioner Muller, and I'll give you all three. But the first part would be the toughest part. Have there been instances of police brutality in recent years in our department? What reforms will the department make in reference to combat racial profiling? And again, what are you doing to keep residents and businesses safe from those who seek the cover of a protest as an opportunity to commit wrongdoings? So I kind of got you all three, but let's start with the most difficult one first.
So yes, there have been allegations of police brutality. There have been allegations of excessive force. There's allegations of rudeness, like there is in every police department. I think what's important to say is that is how we investigate now compared to before the Department of Justice came, because it's such a huge piece of how we do things. People have been found and disciplined and been recommended to training and lost vacation days and things like that. We have terminated officers. So, we are taking a much more proactive approach to these things. But as you said, Mayor, a big piece of it is the DOJ agreement. Of those 100 different recommendations that not even recommendations, directives that we need to comply with, really has put us in a much better position for where we are now in the world compared to where we were before the DOJ came. I say, and some people wouldn't agree with me, but the Department of Justice investigation may have been one of the best things that ever happened to us, because it's hard to change from within. And it's hard to look at things as, when you are part of an organization, it's hard to look within and have the appropriate amount of introspect and reflection to get you where you need to go. And the other thing that helped with the Department of Justice is they have best practice approaches that have worked in other places. So for example, to your question, now we categorize use of force based on 3 levels, level 3, 2, and 1. 3 being the most serious. That could be a strike to the head. It could be an injury to a person. And in this case now, internal affairs is called before anyone even makes a complaint. So it's important to stress that to people, that we have these things in place. We also have, with respect to, as we're seeing everything unfold in Minneapolis with respect to that officer, we have an early intervention program now, where that officer is alleged, I believe, to have 18 complaints. One of the DOJ directives was to have an early intervention program to see what's going on. Is there a pattern and practice of abuse? Is there a pattern and practice of behavior that's not acceptable? Can we rectify this behavior by training? If training doesn't work, can we move to a disciplinary track? And all those things now are happening with respect to how we are dealing with discipline and things like that. We still have a ways to go, but the investigation process is far more robust now than it was, before you came in, Mayor. For example, and I don't like throwing out statistics because there's so much more to things than statistics, but for excessive force allegations in 2011, Mayor, when you took over as mayor of Yonkers, we had 88 complaints of excessive force. Last year in 2019, we had 6. And the public needs to keep in mind that with respect to the 6, we are now self-reporting. So the 18 or the 88 might even been higher, because if people didn't complain, we may not have investigated them. So it's important to give, historical context to all these things. So that's, I guess, question part 1. Mayor, part 2 is, Mayor, part 2 to the 3 questions.
What reforms will the police department make to help combat racial profiling?
So what we're looking at with respect to reforms, a couple things. First of all, when I look at it, and again, I'm an evidence fact-based guy, I do evaluations, and I do, I make decisions on that. So one of the things that we've recognized is, while the excessive force complaints are down just demonstrably, I mean, from 88 to 6 is pretty good. Not that any excessive force incident is acceptable, but 88 to 6 is progress. I don't know if anybody would raise their hand and say it's not progress. However, the disrespect and day-to-day interactions that aren't physical, just based on where you treat somebody poorly, can have an impact on a person's perception of the police and their trust and faith in the police that can last a lifetime. And that's something that I think we can do a lot of work on. As Dr. Quezada said, the implicit bias training is huge on that. And to your point earlier, Mayor, I do apologize to Dr. Quezada for not including him in the great work between the Force and the Brave. It is true that Dr. Quezada has been with us every single step of the way. And it's a gift. I see it as a gift of Dr. Quezada and the mayor saying, here's an opportunity for the police with the Yonkers Force to really make inroads into a group of people, a subset of the population, high school kids of color, that we didn't have before. So thank you, Dr. Quezada, for that gift. You're a great colleague, and I love working with you. But as far as the reform, so what we're going to do immediately is we're working with the Guardians, because I think the Yonkers Guardians, are in a very unique position, in particular because they are African-American, but they're also police officers. So in my mind, who better to, have a really good understanding as to what it is that our specific Yonkers Police Department could use the most. If we had a sliding scale of wants and asks, from the top being, the most important being a 10 down to 1, what we settled on, and I know that there's a lot of different constituencies within Yonkers that are part of this conversation. They're very supportive of implicit bias training. So that's one of the reforms. Everyone's going to implicit bias training. I'm going first. I'm going to be part of the very first training session. We did recognize a number of things, with input from the Guardians, that we should not do it in-house, that it just doesn't have the same impact as if we did a train the trainer. So we're not doing a train the trainer. We are contracting with, we have a number of nationally accredited and nationally known groups that do this training. We've identified how much it costs. So again, Mayor, I know you love actionable items. We've identified a cost. We're putting it into place as to how we do this. We're having conversations with the different firms. Like, does it make sense to do supervisors separate from cops? Does it make sense to do it, precinct by precinct, so that the folks who are working with each other every day are going through the training together? Because I'm assuming there's lots of role plays and things like that. So I think the perspective of the Guardians, to me, I place at a very high premium, because they can draw from their experiences being Black in America and also being police officers in America. So to me, it's very, very valuable, bringing them to the table. And they have been fantastic in terms of wanting to step up and being part of this process and getting us in the right direction. So I applaud the Guardians under the leadership of Charlie Walker as president, and the rest, of the Guardians. To the third point, Mayor, you're talking about crime. That was the third question.
The third question was, yes, it was basically what kind of give everybody an update. I think you already addressed this really for the most part. The residents, businesses, an update on how we've been able to protect the protesters from those who are looking to commit crime. loot, and whatever.
I'm sorry, Mayor. You're referring to how were we able to separate like peaceful protesters from people wanting to damage businesses and things?
I think that, yeah, you can probably answer it any way. Like, that's the way I would look at it as, we have been able to protect the protesters and giving them the opportunity to go out there and to listen. The first Sunday, we walked around, well, I didn't, you guys did, for 7 hours. And, that was, and there were agitators in the crowd, and I witnessed some of it. But like I said, the vast majority of the people were peace-loving people who wanted their voices to be heard, and they were going to be heard one way or another, and they were. So how did the maybe just to kind of give us an idea, real quick, on how your department was able to do that?
Sorry. I think a lot of it has to do with us taking a proactive approach and sitting down and working with the event organizers, community activists, and clergy in advance. So we had solidarity with those that wanted their voices heard, but didn't want to see property damage. So the police were hand in glove, as you say, working with the peaceful protesters, where I think that, I'm sure that there were, just body language and everything else that the police represented, and the peaceful protesters represented a solidarity that we wanted peaceful protests. We wanted people to say the things and vent without damaging property. So I think maybe agitators didn't feel as comfortable they would elsewhere because we were working with our activists, our clergy, our community residents, and people that we were aligned with those folks. And so we kind of outnumbered protesters between the cops and the peaceful protesters versus those that would want to cause chaos.
I'm going to wrap this up. I think we're going to wrap this up, but let me start by saying to the young people in our city, I'm so very, very proud of you and your willingness to go out there to be supportive of a movement that can, really radically change the way our community and our country operates, and do so in a way that's very, very positive, especially for the African American community. We all know, and I think that if you don't know the history, you need to learn the history of what has happened that has brought us to this point. So remember, real change, right? Dr. Bostic, begins here for each and every one of us. It's easy to tell other people to change, but and as Dr. Casada said, we all can learn from here, and the real change comes from here. So keep up the work. And Jim Kavanaugh, I didn't ask you to say anything, but do you want to add anything before we sign out?
Just let people know, the last couple of months, we've been, the efforts of City Hall is to get people through this very difficult time, and that's going to continue. Mr. Mayor, you're aware of this, but I want to make the public aware of it. We have some federal money that will be coming to the city, and we're sitting down figuring out how we can best use it. And we know that there are two needs that people are going to have. One is food. It's kind of heartbreaking when you see how many people are using the food banks in the city these days. So we're working with our local organizations to be sending some more money their way. And the other thing is we're looking at some ways that we can help people who perhaps small business owners, micro businesses that are usually 5 people or less. We know a lot of them are having a really difficult time. So we're trying to put together a program where we'll be giving micro loans or micro grants to these micro businesses. And also some rental assistance for people who are falling behind on their rent. And again, these are all things you've asked us to look at, things you've asked us to put in place. But I think it's important that the public knows, what the city government's going to be doing in the coming weeks and months to help with the after effects of the pandemic. As we get healthier, some of those other problems come at us, and so we're working on.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Thank you to the viewers. We're going to try to do this again next week. And remember, social distancing. Remember, stay home if you can. But as the things start to ease up, if you practice social distancing and wear your mask, go up to the restaurants, enjoy the fun with the ease up. But know that we could very easily go the other direction. We don't want to go the other direction. So practice washing your hands and being as safe as you possibly can. And of course, as we continue to reform and make changes, it's all about providing for our doctors, our complete city, for everyone in the city. Justice for the should be for all. So we have a lot of work to do. And I have no doubt that we'll get it all done with this department, with this wonderfully diverse community, of course, led by so many wonderfully diverse and great, solid community leaders. And Dr. Jim Bostic is certainly one of them. So look forward to working with you guys. And next week we'll be together again. So have a good afternoon.